An immigrant's act of kindness for a widow reveals a hidden family secret. This was the story Elena Kowalski had been living without realizing it, each morning walking past the same stooped figure huddled against the biting Chicago wind, never knowing how their lives were already intertwined by threads invisible yet unbreakable. The January cold cut through Elena's wool coat as she hurried down Michigan Avenue, her breath creating ephemeral clouds that disappeared as quickly as her hope had these past 8 months. Since Michael's death, winter had taken residence in her bones, a persistent chill that no amount of layering could dispel. At 43, the widow's dark hair now carried streaks of premature silver, matching the gray that had settled over her world like a shroud. The coffee shop beckoned with its golden light, a small reprieve from the bleak morning. Inside, the familiar scents of espresso and cinnamon momentarily lifted her spirits. Elena ordered her usual, medium Americano, black, and claimed her corner table, spreading out student essays from her high school literature class. Teaching had become both her anchor and her drift, providing structure while simultaneously reminding her how unmoored her life had become. "Ma'am, you forgot your change." The accented voice pulled her from the red ink bleeding across a sophomore's interpretation of The Great Gatsby. Elena turned to see one of the baristas, a man she'd noticed working there these past few months. Tall and lean, with deep-set eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, he extended his hand with 3 crumpled dollar bills. "Thank you." Elena forced a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Vasil, right? That's what your name tag says." His weathered face brightened momentarily. "Yes. Most Americans call me Vaz because it's easier." His Ukrainian accent wrapped around the words, giving them a musical quality. "I prefer Vasil." She tucked the bills into her wallet. "It's your name, after all." Something flickered in his expression, gratitude perhaps, before he returned to the counter. Elena watched him for a moment longer than necessary. There was a dignity in his movements despite the visible exhaustion, a carefulness as he crafted each drink. His fingers, she noticed, bore the calluses of someone who had known harder work than steaming milk. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows of the cafe. Chicago winters had always been brutal, but this one felt personal in its cruelty. Elena pulled her cardigan tighter and returned to her grating, pushing away thoughts of coming home to an empty apartment, to Michael's absence still palpable in every corner. 3 tables away, Vasil wiped down the counter, his eyes occasionally drifting to the widow. There was something familiar about her that he couldn't place, perhaps a resemblance to someone from his past life in Lviv. Working double shifts had become his routine in the 7 months since arriving in America, leaving little time for reflection, which was precisely the point. Memory was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when survival consumed every waking hour. The apartment he shared with 2 other Ukrainian immigrants in Rogers Park barely qualified as shelter, a 1-bedroom converted to house 3 grown men, each working different shifts, so they rarely crossed paths except to exchange tired nods. Vasil had been an engineer back home before the war had taken his wife, his home, and finally, his country. At 52, starting over meant accepting that dignity was now a privilege, not a right. His shift ended at noon, but Javier was late again, which meant Vasil couldn't leave until his replacement arrived. By the time he bundled up in his threadbare coat, a donation from the resettlement agency, it was nearly 1 o'clock, and the temperature had dropped further. He stepped outside just as Elena was leaving, nearly colliding with her at the door. "Excuse me," they said in unison, their breath mingling in the cold air. Elena nodded politely before hurrying down the sidewalk. Vasil watched her for a moment, noticing how she hunched against the wind, as if bearing an invisible weight. He recognized that posture. It was the same one he adopted when memories pressed too heavily on his shoulders. 3 blocks from the coffee shop, Elena's car refused to start. The engine sputtered weakly before giving up entirely, a mechanical death rattle that matched her frustrated groan. After 5 more attempts, she rested her forehead against the steering wheel, suddenly overwhelmed by this minor setback. It wasn't about the car, it was about one more thing she had to face alone. Michael had always handled car troubles. "Just another puzzle to solve," he'd say with that easy smile before disappearing under the hood. Now, she sat paralyzed, watching other vehicles navigate the slush-covered streets with infuriating efficiency. Calling a tow truck would mean waiting in the cold, alone with thoughts she'd been desperately avoiding. A tap on her window startled her. Vasil stood there, concern etched across his features. Elena rolled down the window, the cold air rushing in. "Car problems?" he asked unnecessarily. Elena nodded, embarrassed by the tears threatening to spill. "It won't start. Probably the battery. May I?" He gestured toward the hood. Part of her wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle this herself. But another part, the part that had been drowning in solitude, relented. "Thank you." Vasil examined the engine with practiced ease, his movements deliberate and confident. "Your battery cables are corroded, and it's very cold. I can try to clean them, but you may need a jump start." The competence in his assessment surprised her, though she immediately chided herself for the assumption. Of course he had skills beyond making lattes. This man had lived a whole life before serving her coffee. "I have cables in my trunk," she offered. "Good. Let me find someone with a running car." 20 minutes later, thanks to a friendly driver in a pickup truck, Elena's car hummed to life. Relief flooded through her, disproportionate to the situation. "You should have the battery replaced soon," Vasil advised, wiping his grimy hands on a napkin from his pocket. "This one is old." "Thank you," Elena said, meaning it. "You saved me from what would have been a very long, very cold afternoon." Vasil smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his tired face. "In Ukraine we help neighbors. Here I have no neighbors yet, so I help." He paused, searching for the word. "Strangers. I'm Elena." She extended her hand. "Elena Kowalski." Something shifted in Vasil's expression, a brief, almost imperceptible tension. Then it was gone, replaced by polite acknowledgement as he shook her hand. "Vasil Petrenko. Kowalski was my husband's name," she added, not sure why she felt compelled to explain. "He passed away last spring." Compassion softened Vasil's features. "I am sorry for your loss. My wife, she also is gone. 2 years now." Their eyes met in silent recognition, members of the same unwanted club. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to this small moment of connection between two people bound by separate griefs. "Can I drive you somewhere?" Elena offered. "To thank you properly." Vasil hesitated. "I was going to the library. It's warm there and I can use the computers." "I know where it is. Please let me drive you." "It's the least I can do." The ride to the Harold Washington Library was mostly silent, but not uncomfortably so. Occasionally, Elena glanced at her passenger, noticing how he sat perfectly upright, hands folded in his lap, as if afraid to take up too much space. The car's heater finally kicked in, filling the vehicle with blessed warmth. "What do you use the library computers for?" she asked as they neared their destination. "English lessons. And to email my daughter in Germany." Pride tinged his voice at the mention of his child. "She is studying medicine there." "Very smart girl, my Natalia." "That's wonderful," Elena replied, feeling a familiar pang. She and Michael had wanted children, but after 2 miscarriages and years of trying, they'd finally accepted it wasn't meant to be. Now she sometimes wondered if childlessness was a blessing in disguise. No one else to shoulder the grief of losing Michael. At the library, Elena made an impulsive decision. "Would you mind if I joined you? I have some research to do for my class." Surprise flickered across Vasil's face before he nodded. "Of course." Inside, they found 2 computers side by side. While Vasil struggled through an English grammar exercise, Elena pretended to search for teaching resources, secretly watching him from the corner of her eye. There was something fascinating about his determination, the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he mouthed English words silently. After an hour, Vasil sighed and rubbed his eyes. "English has too many exceptions. In Ukrainian, rules make sense." Elena smiled. "English is a thief of a language. It steals from everywhere and doesn't apologize." This earned a chuckle from Vasil. "Like American foreign policy." The political joke surprised her, reminding her again that the man beside her had depths she couldn't begin to fathom. Before she could respond, his stomach growled audibly. "Sorry," he murmured, embarrassed. "Have you eaten today?" She checked her watch. Nearly 4 o'clock. The slight hesitation before his nod told her the truth. "I'll eat at home later." Elena made another impulsive decision, one that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. "There's a Polish deli around the corner. My husband used to love their pierogi. Would you like to join me for an early dinner?" The invitation hung between them, weighted with implications neither fully understood. For Elena, it represented a step toward something she'd been avoiding, genuine human connection. For Vasil, it was uncomfortably close to charity, yet the mention of Polish food stirred something in him he couldn't articulate. I would like that, he finally said. Czerwone Jabłuszko was exactly as Elena remembered it, warm, bustling, and fragrant with the scents of caraway and simmering cabbage. The walls were decorated with folk art and photographs of Poland, creating a bubble of Eastern Europe in the heart of Chicago. They found a small table near the window, where the fading winter light cast long shadows across the checkered tablecloth. "This reminds me of home," Vasil said, looking around appreciatively. "Ukraine and Poland, we are cousins in many ways. Michael's grandparents came from Krakow," Elena explained. "He grew up eating this food. I'm Italian-American myself, but I learned to cook some Polish dishes for him." She stopped, surprised by how easily she was speaking of Michael. Usually his name caught in her throat like a fishbone. They ordered borscht, pierogi, and golubki, the waitress bringing them thick slices of dark rye bread while they waited. Vasil broke off a piece, inhaling its scent with closed eyes. "Real bread," he murmured. "American bread is like clouds. No substance." Elena laughed, her first genuine laugh in months. Michael used to say the same thing. He insisted on buying bread from this very deli. As they ate, their conversation flowed more easily. Vasil told her about Lviv, the beautiful city in western Ukraine he'd called home his entire life, until Russian tanks had made that impossible. He spoke of his career as a structural engineer, of the buildings he had helped design, now some of them reduced to rubble. He mentioned his wife, Larisa, only briefly, a mathematics professor who had died not from bombs, but from a heart attack during the early days of the invasion, the stress and fear proving too much for her weakened heart. "And you?" he asked, sopping up the last of his borscht with bread. "You are a teacher, yes?" Elena nodded. "High school literature. 17 years now. I met Michael when we both taught at the same school. He was a history teacher. How did he die, if you don't mind my asking?" The question was direct in the way Americans rarely were, but Elena found his straightforwardness refreshing. "Cancer. Pancreatic. It was quick, only 4 months from diagnosis to—" She swallowed hard. "To the end." Vasil nodded solemnly. "Quick is better, I think. Less suffering. But harder for those left behind. No time to prepare? Is there ever enough time to prepare for losing someone you love?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "No," he said simply. "Never enough." They finished their meal in contemplative silence. When the check came, Vasil reached for it, but Elena was quicker. "Please let me—" "You helped me today." He frowned, his pride clearly wounded. "I cannot let a woman pay for my meal." "It's not because you're a man or an immigrant," Elena said gently. "It's because you're the first person who's made me laugh since Michael died. That's worth more than a few pierogi." Their eyes met across the table, a current of understanding passing between them. Finally, Vasil nodded once, a simple acknowledgement of the gift being offered, not charity, but gratitude. Outside, the early February darkness had already fallen, the temperature dropping with the sun. Elena offered to drive Vasil home, and this time he accepted without protest. As they navigated the city streets, she found herself reluctant for the evening to end. There was something healing about being in the presence of someone who understood loss without requiring explanations. "Turn here," Vasil directed as they entered Rogers Park, the building with the green awning. Elena pulled up to a dilapidated 3-story walk-up, its facade crumbling in places. This was where he lived? The contrast between the competent, dignified man beside her and these surroundings created a dissonance she couldn't reconcile. "Thank you for the ride. And the dinner." Vasil's hand rested on the door handle, but he made no move to leave. "Would you—" Elena hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Would you like to meet at the coffee shop sometime? When you're not working? I could help with your English if you want." The offer surprised both of them. Vasil studied her face carefully, as if looking for hidden motives. Finding none, he smiled, that same genuine smile that transformed his features. "I would like that very much." They exchanged phone numbers, Vasil carefully entering hers into an outdated flip phone. As he finally stepped out of the car, he turned back. "Why Kowalski?" he asked suddenly. "Your husband was Polish, but you said you are Italian." The question caught Elena off guard. "Oh, I just kept his name after we married. I like the connection to his heritage. My maiden name is Ricci." Vasil nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim streetlight. "Good night, Elena Kowalski." "Good night, Vasil Petrenko." As she drove home, Elena realized she felt different, lighter somehow, as if some invisible burden had shifted, not disappeared but become more bearable. For the first time in 8 months, she was looking forward to tomorrow. What began as gratitude evolved into routine. Each Saturday, they would meet at the coffee shop, Neutral Ground, where Elena would help Vasyl with English idioms and pronunciation. In return, he taught her a few phrases in Ukrainian, laughing good-naturedly at her mangled attempts. Дякую. She practiced one afternoon, the unfamiliar sounds clumsy on her tongue. Better, he encouraged. But you say it from your nose, not your heart. Дякую, he repeated, the word flowing melodically. What does your daughter think about you being in America now? Elena asked, giving up on Ukrainian pronunciation for the moment. Vasyl's face softened at the mention of Natalia. She is happy I am safe, but worried too. She wants me to come to Germany, but, he shrugged, visa problems, and I have nothing to offer there. At least here I can work, send her some money. Elena had learned that Vasyl was actually working 3 jobs, mornings at the coffee shop, evenings at a warehouse, and weekends cleaning office buildings. The grueling schedule explained the perpetual shadows under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands when he was tired. Do you have a picture of her? Elena asked. Vasyl nodded, pulling out his wallet to retrieve a slightly creased photograph. A beautiful young woman with her father's serious eyes smiled at the camera, her arm around Vasyl's shoulders. They stood in front of what appeared to be a university building. She has your smile, Elena observed, though in truth she rarely saw Vasyl smile so unreservedly. Her mother's smile, he corrected, gently taking back the photo. But yes, my eyes. He hesitated before adding, she was accepted to medical school last month. Full scholarship. Pride radiated from him as he shared this news. I wish her mother could have known. She would have been very proud, Elena said softly. As February gave way to March, their friendship deepened. Elena found herself sharing stories about Michael that she had kept locked away, not just the sanitized memories of his goodness, but the complex reality of their marriage, with its friction points and compromises. Vasyl, in turn, spoke more freely about Larissa and their life in Lviv, about the home he had built with his own hands over 5 summers, about the garden where his wife had grown sunflowers taller than himself. You never consider that the last ordinary day is the last, he reflected during one of their conversations. The last normal breakfast, the last argument about something foolish, the last time you watched them sleep. If we knew, we would pay more attention. His words resonated with Elena, who had often tortured herself with similar thoughts. What if she had insisted Michael see a doctor sooner? What if she had been more patient during his final weeks, when pain made him irritable and withdrawn? I keep his clothes, she admitted one rainy Saturday. Everyone says I should donate them, move on. But I can't. Not yet. Time means nothing to grief, Vasyl said simply. Keep his clothes until you don't need to anymore. Their conversations weren't always heavy with loss. Sometimes they debated books. Vasyl was partial to Dostoevsky, while Elena championed Steinbeck, or argued good-naturedly about whether American coffee deserved to be called coffee at all. Sometimes they walked along the lakefront, watching the water change colors with the sky. Chicago began to thaw, and something inside Elena thawed with it. One evening in late March, Elena invited Vasyl to her apartment for dinner. She had been cooking all afternoon, eggplant parmesan, her grandmother's recipe, with fresh bread and a bottle of Chianti she'd been saving for a special occasion. Though she hadn't consciously acknowledged it, this invitation represented a significant step, allowing someone new into the space she had shared with Michael. Vasyl arrived precisely on time, a small potted plant in his hands. Mint, he explained, offering it to her. For tea or for cooking? It is not much, but it's perfect, Elena assured him, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. In Ukraine, she knew, one never arrived empty-handed. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, taking in the comfortable 2-bedroom apartment with its bookshelves lining every available wall. So different from his cramped shared room with its single mattress on the floor. Please make yourself at home, Elena encouraged, taking his coat, newer than the threadbare one he'd worn when they first met, but still clearly second-hand. As Vasyl moved into the living room, his attention was caught by the photographs on the mantel. His steps slowed as he approached them, his expression shifting subtly. This is Michael? He asked, picking up a silver-framed photo of Elena and her husband on their wedding day. Yes, Elena confirmed, coming to stand beside him. That was 13 years ago. Vasyl stared at the image intently, his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around the frame. Michael Kowalski had been handsome in a scholarly way, tall and lean with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, his dark hair already beginning to recede at the temples. He had his arm around Elena, who was laughing at something outside the frame, her white dress simple and elegant. He looks... Vasil seemed to search for the right word. Familiar. Did you know many Polish Americans in Lviv? Elena asked, taking the photo gently from his hands and returning it to the mantel. No. Vasil shook his head. No, I don't think so. But there was an uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. Dinner was delicious, though Elena noticed Vasil seemed distracted, his usual attentiveness dulled by some internal preoccupation. After they'd finished eating, she brought out coffee and cannoli from the Italian bakery down the street. These are magnificent, Vasil declared after his first bite, momentarily returning to his usual self. In Ukraine, desserts are good but heavy. These are like clouds. But the right kind of clouds, he added with a slight smile, referencing their earlier bread conversation. As Elena cleared the plates, Vasil wandered back to the living room, drawn again to the photographs. When she joined him, he was looking at a different picture. Michael at a construction site, wearing a hard hat and pointing at something off camera. Was he an engineer too? Vasil asked, curiosity evident in his tone. No, just a history teacher, Elena explained. But he volunteered with Habitat for Humanity. They build homes for people who need them. He loved working with his hands. Vasil nodded slowly, replacing the photograph with careful precision. Did he ever visit Eastern Europe? For his Polish heritage, perhaps? Actually, yes. Elena settled onto the couch, memories surfacing. About 15 years ago, before we were married, he took a sabbatical year and traveled through Poland, Ukraine, and parts of Russia. He was researching family history, trying to trace his grandparents' journey to America. Something flickered in Vasil's eyes, a recognition or realization he quickly masked. Did he find what he was looking for? Some of it. He tracked down distant cousins in Poland but lost the trail in Ukraine. Elena tilted her head, studying Vasil's suddenly tense posture. Why do you ask? Just curious. He joined her on the couch, leaving careful space between them. What was his family name before it became Kowalski? Many names changed when people came to America. The question struck Elena as odd, but she answered anyway. It was always Kowalski as far as I know, though his grandfather spelled it with a V instead of a W sometimes, Kowalski. Vasil's breath caught audibly, a small sound he tried to cover with a cough. His hands, Elena noticed, had begun to tremble slightly. Are you all right? She asked, concerned by the sudden pallor of his face. Yes, he said quickly. Too quickly. Just tired. It has been a long week. The easy flow of their earlier conversations had vanished, replaced by an awkward tension neither seemed able to navigate. Soon after, Vasil claimed an early morning shift and made his excuses, leaving Elena to wonder what had changed in the space of an evening. For the next week, Vasil was noticeably absent from the coffee shop. When Elena asked about him, his co-workers shrugged, saying only that he had requested different hours. Their Saturday meeting came and went with no word. Elena called twice, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The sudden withdrawal hurt more than she wanted to admit. Had she misread their friendship? Had she made him uncomfortable by inviting him to her home? The questions circled in her mind, finding no resolution. 10 days after their dinner, Elena found a plain white envelope in her faculty mailbox at school. Her name was written in careful block letters with no return address. Inside was a note in the same meticulous handwriting. Elena, I must speak with you about something important. Please meet me tomorrow at the Harold Washington Library, 3rd floor, History section, at 4 p.m. Vasil. The cryptic message left her unsettled, but also relieved. At least he wanted to talk, to explain his sudden disappearance. The next day crawled by, her students noticing her distraction during their discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird. Ms. Kowalski, you asked that question already, pointed out Jamal, one of her more observant sophomores. Did I? I'm sorry. She forced herself to focus, to be present for these young minds who deserved her full attention. By the time the final bell rang, anticipation had knotted in her stomach. What could be so important that Vasil needed to meet in such a specific location? Why the formality of a written note? The library was busy with after-school students when Elena arrived, its massive central atrium humming with muted conversations and the soft clicking of keyboards. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor, making her way past rows of shelves until she reached the history section. Vasil was already there, sitting at a small study table with several books open before him. He looked different, more haggard than usual, with new lines etched around his mouth and eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. When he saw her, he stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Thank you for coming," he said, his accent thicker than usual, a sign of stress she had come to recognize. "What's going on, Vasil?" Elena asked, sitting across from him. "You disappear for over a week, then leave me a mysterious note? I was worried. I am sorry." His gaze dropped to the books before him. "I needed time to understand something. To be certain before I spoke to you." Confusion and concern mingled as Elena studied his troubled expression. "Certain about what?" Instead of answering directly, Vasil turned one of the books toward her. It was a historical text about Ukraine during the Soviet era, open to a page with a black and white photograph of a village. Next to it lay a folder containing what appeared to be printouts from online archives. "Do you know where your husband's family came from in Poland?" Vasil asked, his voice low and controlled. The seemingly disconnected question increased Elena's bewilderment. "A small village outside Krakow, I believe." "Why? And in Ukraine? Did he ever mention where he searched there?" "Vasil, what is this about?" Elena's patience was wearing thin, anxiety replacing confusion. He took a deep breath, then met her eyes directly. "I believe your husband came to my hometown during his research trip, not to Lviv city, but to a small village just outside it called Zolochiv." The name meant nothing to Elena. "That's possible. He visited many places. But why?" "Because," Vasil interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper, "I found this." He slid a printout across the table, a scan of an old registry page from what appeared to be a church record. Names were listed in faded Cyrillic script, with dates beside them. "I don't read Ukrainian," Elena said, frustration edging into her tone. "This is a birth record from 1920, for a baby boy named Andrei Kowalski." Vasil's finger traced the Cyrillic letters. The father was Petro Kowalski. The mother... He paused, swallowing hard. The mother was Nadia Petrenko. The last name registered immediately. "Petrenko? Like you?" Vasil nodded, his expression grave. "Nadia Petrenko was my grandmother." Elena felt the world tilt slightly, information struggling to coalesce into understanding. "Are you saying..." "Petro Kowalski was the father of a child with my grandmother. They were not married. He left for America soon after, apparently not knowing she was pregnant. Their son, Andrei, was raised by my grandmother and her eventual husband, my grandfather. But the birth records show his true father." "And you think this Andrei was related to Michael?" Elena asked, trying to follow the convoluted genealogy. "I believe Andrei was Michael's grandfather, the one who came to America and sometimes spelled his name with a V." The implication slowly dawned on Elena. "You're saying Michael's grandfather and your grandmother... that you and Michael were related?" "Distant cousins, yes." Vasil's hands spread flat on the table as if to steady himself. "When I saw his photograph, something felt familiar. His eyes, they are Petrenko eyes. My father had them, I have them, my daughter has them." Elena leaned back in her chair, the revelation washing over her in waves. If true, it meant the man sitting across from her, this immigrant she had befriended by chance, shared blood with her husband. The coincidence seemed too extraordinary to be real. "How can you be sure?" she asked. "There must be many Kowalskis, many Petrenkos." "I have been researching all week." Vasil gestured to the materials spread before him. "Library records, immigration databases, church archives online. The dates match. The locations match. And there is this." He pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photograph, older and smaller than the one of his daughter he had shown her before. It showed a young woman, perhaps 20, with striking eyes and a solemn expression. "My grandmother Nadia, taken around 1930. Elena took the photograph with trembling fingers. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable, something in the set of the eyes, the angle of the cheekbones, that she had seen in Michael's face every day for 13 years. "This is incredible," she whispered, unable to find adequate words. "If Michael were alive?" "He knew," Vasil said quietly. The simple statement hit Elena like a physical blow. "What?" "Your husband knew. That's why he came to Zolochiv 15 years ago. He found the same records I found. He was looking for his family roots and discovered Nadia Petrenko." "How can you possibly know that?" Disbelief made Elena's voice sharper than intended. Vasil reached for the last item on the table, a thin manila folder that he handled with particular care. "Because of this." Inside was a photocopy of a letter, dated 14 years ago. It was written in English, addressed to the family of Nadia Petrenko, at an address in Zolochiv, Ukraine. Dear relatives, my name is Michael Kowalski. I am an American citizen of Polish and Ukrainian descent. Through my research, I have discovered that my grandfather, Andrzej Kowalski, later Andrew Kowalski, was the son of Petro Kowalski and Nadia Petrenko. I recently visited Zolochiv, but was unable to locate any family members. If you are receiving this letter, we share a family connection that I would very much like to explore. My grandfather never knew his biological father, and I believe he never knew about his Ukrainian family connections. I am enclosing my contact information and would be honored to hear from any relatives of Nadia Petrenko. Sincerely, Michael Kowalski. Elena read the letter twice, her heart pounding. Michael's familiar handwriting jumped from the page, bringing him suddenly, painfully close. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It was in my mother's belongings. She died 3 years ago, before the war started. I never saw this letter until I was packing to leave Ukraine. There was so much happening, I put it aside and forgot about it until I saw your husband's picture. But why wouldn't Michael have told me about this?" The question was directed more at herself than at Vasil. "The letter was never delivered," Vasil explained. "See the stamp here? Return to sender. The address was old. My family had moved to Lviv by then. The letter went back to America." Elena's mind raced through memories. Had there been signs, moments when Michael might have mentioned this failed connection? Nothing surfaced. Yet it made sense. Michael had been deeply interested in genealogy, spending hours constructing elaborate family trees and searching through immigration records. "So you and Michael?" She couldn't quite complete the thought. "We share a great-grandmother," Vasil confirmed. "Nadia Petrenko was my father's mother. Your husband's grandfather was her firstborn son." The revelation sat between them, its weight altering the very air they breathed. Elena stared at the evidence spread across the table, birth records, photographs, the letter in Michael's hand, and felt reality shifting beneath her feet. "An immigrant's act of kindness for a widow reveals a hidden family secret," she murmured, almost to herself, echoing their first meaningful conversation. Vasil's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Yes," he said softly. "Exactly that. Why didn't you just call me? Why disappear for a week?" Vasil's gaze dropped to his hands. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you would think I had some ulterior motive. That perhaps I knew all along and was using this connection to take advantage of your kindness." His voice grew quieter. "Or that knowing this would change how you see our friendship." The vulnerability in his admission touched Elena deeply. She reached across the table, covering his weathered hand with her own. "Vasil, look at me." He raised his eyes reluctantly. "If anything, this makes our connection more meaningful, not less. Don't you see? Out of all the coffee shops in Chicago, all the customers you could have helped that day. It wasn't random. Something brought us together. You don't believe it was just coincidence?" A cautious hope flickered in his expression. "I don't know what I believe anymore," Elena admitted. "But I know that finding you, learning about this connection, it's like having a piece of Michael back that I didn't know was missing." For the first time since they'd met, Vasil's composure cracked completely. Tears filled his eyes, one escaping to track down his cheek. "When I left Ukraine, I lost everything. My home, my community, my country. I thought I had no family left except Natalia. And now you have me." Elena finished for him, her own eyes brimming. Family. The word hung in the air between them, fragile yet powerful. Not romantic. That wasn't what this was, but something equally profound, a recognition of belonging, of shared history neither had known they possessed. They sat in the quiet of the library, surrounded by books documenting countless human stories across centuries, their own unexpected narrative now taking its place among them. Outside, the first real day of spring was unfolding, Chicago emerging from winter's grip, much as they were emerging from grief's isolation. Gradually, tentatively, but with increasing warmth. Later, as they walked along the lakefront, Elena remembered something Michael had once said during their early dating days. They had been discussing fate and coincidence after watching a particularly sentimental movie. "I don't believe people are destined to find each other," he had told her. "But I do believe that once they find each other, they can choose to become each other's destiny." She shared this memory with Vasil, who considered it thoughtfully before responding. "In Ukrainian we say dolya perpletiatsya, destinies intertwine, not because they must, but because they can." Spring blossomed into summer, and with it, their unusual family bond deepened. Elena helped Vasil secure a better apartment and find work more suited to his engineering background at a small construction firm willing to sponsor his work visa. He helped her finally sort through Michael's belongings, each item a story, each decision made easier by sharing the weight of memory. They established new traditions: Sunday dinners where Vasil taught Elena to make proper Ukrainian borscht, movie nights where they introduced each other to films from their respective cultures, long walks through the city as Vasil began to see Chicago not as a temporary shelter, but as home. In August, Natalia came to visit, flying in from Germany for 2 precious weeks. Elena welcomed her with open arms, this beautiful young woman who carried her husband's eyes. They spent hours looking through family photographs, filling in the branches of a tree that stretched across oceans and generations, severed by war and migration, but somehow finding its way back to wholeness. "My father smiles now?" Natalia told Elena one evening as they watched Vasil grilling in the small backyard of Elena's building. "In his messages, in his voice when we talk. I haven't heard him like this since before my mother died. He's given me back my smile too," Elena confessed. "Not by replacing what I lost, but by helping me find something new to hold on to." On a warm September afternoon, almost exactly 1 year after their first meeting, Elena and Vasil stood at Michael's grave in Rose Hill Cemetery. Vasil placed a small stone on the headstone, a Jewish tradition he'd learned from a co-worker, though none of them were Jewish. The gesture of remembrance felt right nonetheless. "Thank you for leading me to her," Vasil said quietly to the marble marker. "Your search brought us together, cousin." Elena watched as he traced the engraved letters of Michael's name with gentle fingers. In that moment, she felt a sense of completion she had thought would never come again. Not happiness exactly, but wholeness. The circle of love and loss had somehow folded back on itself, creating something new from what had been broken. "Ready?" Vasil asked after a final moment of silence. Elena nodded, taking his offered arm as they walked back along the winding cemetery path. "Ready?" Behind them, sunlight glinted off the headstone, illuminating the dates of a life ended too soon, but whose ripples continued to spread in ways no one could have imagined. Before them lay a future neither had anticipated, not as romantic partners but as family found through an immigrant's act of kindness for a widow, revealing a secret that had waited generations to be discovered. They stepped through the cemetery gates together, carrying their intertwined histories forward into autumn's golden light.